we talk about the deep state, we talk about the globalists,
inflation versus deflation. Well, I mean,
here at Mar-a-Lago.
I'm baffled that this isn't front page news.
Do you guys support a specific political party, or do you dislike both of them?
Oh, it worked like a charm on you guys.
Let's go, Brandon.
What's up, everybody? Very excited for our guest tonight. We have Dr. J. Michael Waller of the Center for Security Policy and author of Big Intel: How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. Michael, how are you doing tonight?
Doing great.
Thank you. Yeah, let's get right into it. So a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world today. We were talking a little bit about the U.S. aid situation before we got on, and I mean, I'm fascinated by all this because I've been yelling off the mountaintop about NGOs for years, and I showed a chart the other night that showed like in 1948 there were 40 NGOs, and now today there's like 5,000 of them. How much do you know about like how this monster just got out of control? And like, we know the CIA kind of operates through them and stuff. So is it kind of like the off the books, like military things where they get contractors to do the things that they can't do for them?
There's a lot in your question.
Yeah.
First, there's a ton right there. We could talk for hours on just answering that, and we scratch the surface. But with NGOs, like anybody can set up an NGO. So there's nothing wrong with NGOs as non-governmental organizations. It's a private foundation, or it's a network of people, or a network of groups. It's when somebody in position of authority takes our tax dollars and uses those NGOs as instruments of U.S. policy. And that can be important too, for diplomatic reasons or commercial reasons or intelligence reasons or anything else. They have their roles, but it's when they get out of control that's the problem. It's like when we need an intelligence service, we need what the FBI does, but not when they're out of control. So when something like USAID, which most people don't even think of and probably haven't even heard of, but when it's discovered that it's an illegal slush fund for tens of billions of dollars a year that's handed out without any accountability to these favored networks of NGOs and other people around them and politicians and news organizations that benefit financially from it, then you've got something really messed up with our system, and it has to be cut off at the throat.
Oh yeah. And I mean, how deep do you think this goes? Because I mean, we saw the thing with Politico, we saw the allegations about BBC, I always wondered, like, why is it that these select media networks, they'll like come out with a barrage of like a pretty similar headline when things happen? Like, do you think it's possible that pretty much every single mainstream media outlet was receiving money from something like this?
Well, it's not always money. A lot of it's a crowd mentality, and when people think similarly, or they're after a similar goal, there'll be a leader of it or a couple leaders of it, and then the rest of them follow the lead. Which is why I say the Associated Press is so important, because it provides news to small newspapers and organizations that can't afford their own reporters, or even to big ones that can't cover it. So something like AP, and then that controls the style guide to how to use words in journalism, that most news organizations follow that style guide. So you take control of something like AP, then you can influence far beyond your ability to do so as just one outlet. And then you have the big ones like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and so forth. So they have a pack mentality. Think they've gone to similar journalism schools. We know what journalism schools are like. They're at big organizations where the editorial board is skewed a certain way. And so the schools they teach and train these people to think a certain way. They don't think for themselves for the most part. Having gone to journalism school, I learned early on that you're not rewarded for independent critical thinking. And then the advertisers, look at who the advertisers are. So when you have people like in USAID who also think the same way, and you set up special subscription services. So we'll provide you not just with the news, but with insider newsletters and what's going on in legislation, which, by the way, is a free resource that other government agencies already do for people in the government. But all these deluxe things, so you're not paying $200 a year per subscription. You're paying $10,000 a year for this special subscription. That Politico has one, New York Times has one, who knows who else has one. But it's all a grift. It's all a payoff system. And once these news organizations, even if it's a small portion of their income, it's still a substantial portion of their income, because you saw the day AID was cut was the day Politico said we can't meet payroll this week. So that's state-funded media, but it's covertly done. Like it's
Right.
being run exactly like we would run intelligence operations against other countries. But instead, USAID has become a covert operations unit all its own, accountable to nobody, using American taxpayer dollars to operate against American taxpayers.
Right, and it's like this whole thing was a mirage where they're, creating like they put out headlines, they pay people to protest, like it's they're creating this whole false reality, and then on the same side, on the other side, they're trying to suppress the actual will of the people with like censorship and whatnot, and fact checking this and that. So it's crazy that we're using our own money to do that to us in that heavy of a way.
Yeah.
Uh,
And this
yeah,
is something that nobody knew because
mm,
USAID's been around since 1961. Okay, so
yeah,
President Kennedy started it as a way to combat communist subversion around the world to prevent the Soviet Union from expanding to choke us off. So it made a
right,
lot of sense. Help the poor. We're a wealthy country. We might have a moral obligation, or at least there's a bipartisan consensus for it. But we're also combating Soviet expansionism right where the Soviets are aiming at the poor people of the world. So it made a lot of sense, not just for humanitarian relief, but for development, so they wouldn't always live in poverty. So it served a role as long as it was answerable to the Secretary of State and to the president.
mm-hmm,
Then it comes off, like in any time in government where you don't have some expert on something or you don't have somebody with the technical skills, you bring somebody in on contract to do it. It might be for a day. It's like when you call the plumber at home, right? You're not going to keep a plumber in your employment the whole time, but that one day a year you're going to need him and you call him in, and that's fine. That it saves taxpayer money. It makes things more efficient. And you might even hire somebody for a couple of years or two if there's something going on and they don't want to go into the civil service and they want to keep their own lives as professionals. That's all understandable. But when they're not needed anymore, you don't keep contracting them. And so
right,
what they've ended up doing is they have a contracting industry. Here's the real sick part that I haven't seen a whole lot of attention to yet.
mm-hmm,
Let's say you're a USAID contracting officer and you're running a $100 million a year set of contracts.
yeah,
And you've put in your 20 years government service. So you get your pension and you're making, say you're a GS 15, that's a grade scale level, senior most before you get into the executives. You get like $160,000 a year package. You can retire after 20 years and you get a really nice, about 100,000 plus a year pension for the rest of your life. But then
mm,
you go and set up your own NGO, or you
mm,
join an NGO and you apply to or you set up your own private contracting company, and then you apply for the very grants and contracts that you were administering before, that's run by your former subordinate who has just been elevated to take your place. So it's this cronyism with no oversight. Now, you can pay yourself. The US government allows, by law, it allows executives of contractors to make up to $650,000 a year, roughly a little more, like 664,000, some crazy amount a year.
wow,
So you can pay yourself $664,000 a year, plus make a 10% off the top of the value of the whole contract. So if you get a $10 million contract to do something, you can pay yourself 664,000, and then you get 10% of that 10 million, which is, so you're making $1.6 million
wow,
a year fresh out of government. So that becomes people's goals. And
yeah.
it's a whole network that way. And then, oh, let's help Senator so and so get reelected. So we'll max out and we'll give the most to his campaign. So everything's happy, everything's tidy, and it's all big one happy family as long as everybody just shuts up.
Wow, and that's why we're getting this like belligerent response out of a lot of these Congress people, like they're like where they're outside screaming, telling people
Yeah.
to come rush the Capitol. We need millions of people here because like, and it's funny because they don't even know what to say because the explanation for it isn't like something that the people are going to want to hear.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The sick thing. So I looked at all of the senators and the congressmen who were there, and
yeah,
almost all of them were Beltway bandits. So around Washington, D.C., you have the Beltway, the highway that circles the city.
yeah,
Beltway bandits are people who are contractors and they set up their own business around the Beltway in
mm.
Virginia, Northern Virginia, and Maryland. So you had who? You had the senator from Maryland, who happens to be the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee that oversees USAID, but also
Wow,
sits on the appropriations committee that provides the money to USAID. And his own state takes in billions and billions of dollars per year on just USAID contracts. So he's there representing them. The same thing with one of the senators from Virginia, exact same deal. Congressman Jamie Raskin, He's got $1 billion a year AID contractor right in his district, not just one, but 5 or 6 of them that I've seen so far. I've been to some of their offices, so it's, I mean, I'm not, so of course he's out there, but they're all saying, oh, the poor are going to be hurt. Only 10% of whatever goes to its intended, purposes. So you're thinking, how many people can you feed in Ethiopia for $664,000 a year? Right?
Yeah.
It's a
Oh my
scam.
God. And wow, like, a lot of ways to go with this, but so like one of the first things I thought was the media aspect of this. Does it have anything to do with, you remember when Obama repealed the Smith-Mundt Act in 2013 that like allowed dissemination of information or propaganda? Does it have anything to do with that, or is that just like a kind of a throw in?
Well, the Smith-Mundt Act was intended to prevent the State Department from propagandizing Americans the way it was propagandizing the rest of the world, which the State Department should do in the rest of the world. So that law was passed to prevent the State Department from publishing or distributing its products here among Americans, so that the government wouldn't be infiltrating or influencing American public opinion.
Right.
Now,
And that's way back in like the
USAID
50s, 60s.
Yeah, so yeah, that was in the 50s. Now, and so the USAID budget is part of the State Department appropriations budget. So Smith-Mundt governed USAID money. So by modifying that act, repealing portions of it, Obama was able to make it legal to do what to all of us is really criminal activity. Now, the strange part of this is, years ago, when I was a graduate school professor, I met a very elderly lady who was a staffer for who was then Congressman and later Senator Mundt of the Smith-Mundt Act. He was a congressman at the time. And she said the purpose of that was there were so many communists in the State Department, this was the 1950s, that Smith and Mundt wanted to make sure that there would be no communist propaganda spread by our government against the American people. and
That's unbelievable.
So during the McCarthy period, right, when it was like, really, first, McCarthy was right on just about everything he was saying. He made a few mistakes and they hanged him for it. But if you look at it, this was something where you had bipartisan support for the Smith-Mundt Act, bipartisan concerns about communist infiltration of our government. But now in 2025, you have literal Marxists running USAID.
Yeah. Wow. So repealing that did enable them to get crazier with this media stuff, I guess, and in terms of it being legal. So maybe is this technically not illegal because of this? Because this is one of my favorite articles ever, by the way. Like, it's from AP, who allegedly got money from USAID. Headline: Obama did not sign a law allowing propaganda in the U.S. And then you scroll down the facts. The amendment did not repeal Smith-Mundt Act, but rather lifted some restrictions on the domestic dissemination of government-funded media. So, 3 lines under the headline, it's like saying the definition of propaganda.
Yeah, literally. And so what they do is they say somebody, people say he had the Smith-Mundt Act repealed. No, he had it modified and he had sections of it repealed. But that's okay. That gives you the headline that people who say that Obama had the whole Smith-Mundt Act repealed, they're wrong. Obviously, they're the ones with disinformation. When really, they bury the truth in the 3rd paragraph that people don't read.
That's hilarious. So today, Trump said something I thought was really exciting, something I've been waiting for a long time. He said that he's going to send Elon Musk to start auditing the Pentagon. And one of my most mind-blowing mysteries I've ever seen is this right here. The stuff like the Pentagon has a $35 trillion accounting black hole. They've never passed an audit before. So I mean, I keep telling people we're probably just hit the tip of the iceberg with the USAID stuff. Do you think this is like the mother lode right here?
Well, USAID is, only, if we can say only what, $47 billion a year.
Yeah.
Only, unaudited. The Pentagon is what, over $1 trillion a year.
Yeah, pretty much.
So it would, if you spent $1 billion a year, it would take you 1,000 years to spend $1 trillion. That's how huge this is. Yeah. So there is so much fraud and so much abuse and so much corruption in Pentagon spending that it is really, way overdue. And this is the thing, people in Congress and a lot of conservatives, well, we have to support the troops. We have to spend more money to support the troops. Really? You're going to support the troops with trillions of dollars in fraud? Doesn't that defraud the troops also?
Yeah, and you got all these guys, these veterans that are nearly homeless or poor, and they get terrible health care. And but then, like, where's this money disappearing to? I mean, I ask that rhetorically because I guess we have a pretty good understanding of the system, and it's like just kickbacks and them getting price gouged by the contractors and all that. But I'm like, where like is this going to black ops? Is it like because this is like an entire year of a GDP right here?
$1 trillion black op.
Yeah, I
You
know.
couldn't hide it. You couldn't hide it. No, it's mainly, first of all, we haven't had a real strategic reassessment of how do we defend our country and what our national vital interests are since the late 1940s. We
Mhm.
defeated Hitler. We defeated the fascists. This is, the Soviet communism was on the march. What do we do? So the system we have now was developed in 1947, 48, 49.
Yes.
And we're still operating that way. So when you're still building super carriers, and we need aircraft carriers, but
Mhm.
where are our drone forces? We
Right.
don't have them. Where are our real hardcore cyber forces that can take other enemies down before they come at us? We have them, but we haven't spent much in them because we're still funneling tons of money into an obsolete strategy designed to fight the Cold War and then
Mm.
modified to fight what? A couple guys in a cave, Al Qaeda.
Yeah. Well,
And we never fully adapted. So there's going to be waste. Let's say all of it was spent wisely and honestly under that strategy. It's still an obsolete, wasteful strategy. Now you combine that with graft and grift and fraud and abuse and all of these other things. Imagine you're an officer in the army and you aspire always to be promoted and you can retire at full colonel. You'll get put on. You can do your own contracting company. They'll hire you. Your colonel's pension is pretty generous. But then
Mhm.
you go on to these companies, and I know guys who've made millions and millions of dollars as Pentagon contractors. Now, I don't have any problem with Pentagon contractors making a fortune if they add value to defend us.
Right.
So if they develop a technique or a technology or something, or have special advice that saves American lives, saves American resources, it's a value even to pay them a lot of money. Where it becomes a ripoff is when it becomes cronyistic. So you think,
Yeah.
how do you really get promoted in the American military now?
Mm.
You have to brown nose your way up.
Mhm.
You have to go along with what your superiors do because it's your superiors who recommend their subordinates for promotion. And once you break from Lieutenant Colonel '05 to Colonel '06, that's really the breaking point between sort of how much money you're going to make or where your prestige is going to be. So you got full bird colonel, then you're fine. Navy captain, great. But once you make general or admiral, that's even better. And if you can retire at 4 stars, which what 40 we have 40, 50 4 stars. I don't know the exact number,
Yeah,
but say
sounds about
a
right.
few dozen. Um, they retire with a $200,000 a year salary for life. They retire
Wow.
in their what late 50s, early 60s
Yeah.
for life, plus all the benefits, plus all the privileges that come with it. Tons of privileges. So the taxpayer is probably shelling out $300,000 a year per retired 4-star general for life. And most of these 4 stars, few of them are real commanders. They're just uniform bureaucrats because while we think of the general officer as a rank, they call
Yeah.
themselves pay scale.
Hmm.
And it's matched with the civil service pay scale and
Oh,
then the
wow.
executive service pay scale. So it's matched. So you have a civilian go in right now. They put in Darren Beatty as Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy acting. That's 3-star general rank.
Oh, wow.
The guy from Revolver News.
Right.
So he's a 3-star general now, civilian equivalent. So these generals go out. Every single defense contractor wants to put generals on their boards of directors. So you get
Mm.
me being a general, or brought in as a very highly paid consultant. So on top of their pension, they're making a few $100,000 a year off this. So it becomes multi-million-dollar a year gig, or they become partners in a firm where they then get a portion of the profits, or they set up their own companies and they get their
Mm.
10% on top of everything else. And some of these guys make, you know, outrageous fortunes, which is okay if they're providing value, but very few of them are.
Right. When they're just favor trading or trading information, that's not cool. Like, was it like I think JP Morgan hired General Milley after he retired. Right. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's pretty standard where you want to
Yeah.
hire a high level person with a lot of visibility. Where his value is though is his personal network.
Right.
General Milley can call almost anybody in the world who he wants, any foreign leader, any business leader, any defense minister in any other country, lots of people in the system here. He can open up doors, and that's his value. So but imagine you aspire to this not to serve your country. You're really aspiring to cash in on your duty. So of course Milley's going to come in and get as woke can be, because that's what Obama wanted, for him to be promoted. And then Trump, can you even name his defense secretaries? All of them? It's hard to keep track. But the first one was just as woke because they all knew each other, and they were all just doing what the civilian leadership under 8 years of Obama demanded that they do. And then they elevated people beneath them who thought the same way they did with imposing all this DEI. So if you wanted to make these higher ranks, you had to buy into DEI or you're out. No one wants to get out with those kinds of stakes. A very rare person will.
Wow. So when it comes to the CIA and the FBI getting out of control, when I see the title of your book, was there a time that they were heroes? Because maybe that's pessimistic of me to say, but you hear the beginning of the FBI. It's Hoover. He's into all the corruption and blackmail and stuff. You got the Dulles brothers, the CIA, and George H.W. Bush. You hear crazy stories about that. So, when exactly were they heroes? Was there like a time where they were operating as patriots? Because I wanted to work for the CIA for a period of time too, but then once I started learning about how they operate, I'm like, oh wow, they actually aren't so good all the time.
Well, first, here's the subtitle of the book, as you just said, Cold War Heroes and Deep State Villains. I really believe very strongly that they were Cold War heroes. But what people tend to do is to look at everyone's faults and everyone's mistakes and everyone's dumb decisions or just bad decisions or bad people doing something, or then other things that look kind of crooked, but that was the way it was done at the time, and it really was a net benefit to all of us as Americans. But let's look at J. Edgar Hoover. He when he was 25 years old, it was 1920. He was a Justice Department lawyer, fresh out of law school, and he was put in charge of a tiny unit called the Radicals Division inside the FBI. And his job was to identify and to round up all the foreigners who had come to this country as radical socialists, anarchists, and communists. And this was at a time when we had a president, McKinley, who was assassinated by an anarchist, and you had President Teddy Roosevelt, who was shot not by an anarchist, but still, you had terrorist violence, you had bombings, you had the bombing at the Attorney General's house. I think the mayor of Chicago or governor of Illinois, I don't remember, was killed in one of these bombings. But it was a widespread bombings of terrorism in the early few years of the 1900s, even before World War I.
Oh, wow.
And then the Bolshevik Revolution going on in Russia. But who was here? Who was in New York before the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917? But Leon Trotsky, the founder of the Bolshevik Red Army. So he was here agitating people. So J. Edgar Hoover's job was to find these people, round them up, deport them back to Russia. And for a 25-year-old with no experience and with little help and with few laws governing it, and none of the computer, resources that we have, it was all, primitive telephone and telegraph, working with local cops everywhere. He did as good a job as he possibly could, but he made some mistakes. And he's been crucified all those years for those mistakes. Early on, now that he made other mistakes, imagine being 48 years as head of anything, right? You're going to get long in the tooth. You're going to make it your own personal fiefdom. You're going to have abuses. But if you look at what he did, so his first job, and then when he went and became FBI director, was really to round up extremists from other countries and to get them out of here. He only had a limited capability to do that, and because then we had the crime waves coming on in the 1920s and 30s when we needed, or it was perceived that we needed larger federal law enforcement. But if you go through his writings, which is what I did in writing the book, and I knew a lot of people who knew him, and he was always warning about Marxist infiltration of our society going back to 1920. They're infiltrating our schools. They're infiltrating our seminaries, our churches, our news media, our entertainment, our economy, everything, politics. And he was our government, constantly warning against this. So who's going to trash him for saying this Well, the
Right.
people that he's warning about, right? And so
Right.
they hate him. So a lot of the histories of Hoover and even the news accounts at the time of Hoover were what a terrible guy he is because he's seeing this phantom communists everywhere. But you look back at history, he was right.
Yeah, and we still got it today.
Yeah. So I think that, he was a Cold War hero. He busted a lot of Soviet spy rings early on. The people who passed our atom bomb secrets to Stalin.
Mm.
He
Oh,
busted
wow.
those people and a whole lot more. And he was warning against Soviet penetration of our foreign intelligence service before we even had a CIA.
Oh, wow. So what was it that was making that such an infectious, pervasive idea here? Is it just like the sales pitch of like the Marxist mentality of like that everybody should be equal, everybody should get the same thing, and that's just like an infectious mindset to the majority of people, or what? Like what exactly was it?
Well, it wasn't so much Marxism because or say sharing or even socialism because Hoover left the socialists alone. Nobody cared about the socialists. It's not a question of that. The thing is with the Communist Party members or members of foreign communist parties here, back then, if you were a member of the party, it's called a vanguard party. So you do whatever the party tells you, and
Mm,
you swear an oath to do that, and you can never leave.
mm.
But you swore an oath to be loyal to the Soviet Union and to
Oh, wow.
overthrowing the United States government to create a United Soviet States of America. So
Oh,
they were
wow.
all acting as every party member was acting as agents of the Soviet Union, consciously doing so, willfully doing so. If you look at the protests in up to August 1939, it was hey, we have to beware of Hitler and the rise of fascism. But once Hitler and Stalin signed that secret pact, the U.S. Communist Party was saying, America first, no intervention in Europe, stay out of it. And they didn't come back to being patriotic to defend our interests until Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, when Hitler surprised Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. Then the party says, oh, we all have to wave the American flag and we're all patriots and let's all together fight the fascists. So, so you can say they were total tools. And we know about this in detail because why? Because the FBI was spying on them. The
Mm.
FBI was infiltrating them. It was informing Congress. It was informing the presidents, whatever president it was. It was informing our military. And so it was operating great. But then there were people who were not party members, but whose friends were or whose family members were, and they were socialists or leftists. And as you said, well, what's wrong with just sharing things and redistributing property? It's a different way of doing things. That's not a crime to talk that way, and it's not a crime. But Hoover wasn't paying attention to them unless he could follow their trails because they were operating out in the open.
Oh,
And
okay.
he needed to follow their trails to find the people who he needed to bust. So they were the ones out there whether it was the New York Times or the Atlantic or the New Republic or whatever else, screaming against this terrible repression that the FBI is doing. Now, there were
So,
also times,
oh
I'll
no,
go
good.
on this one. There are also times when you're in a tight situation, you need to do something. You've got this, Soviet military intelligence operation that's penetrating here, and there's no law for or against what you're doing. You just do it, and then you find out you've blown it. You've made a mistake. You've done something illegal. You violated something else. Those are mistakes that are going to happen even in the best of situations.
Right. That makes sense. So something I've always been confused about is that General Patton, probably the most popular guy after World War II, screaming off the mountaintops, "Hey, like, why are we stopping on Germany? And let's go take out Stalin. Let's go take out Russia all we can. We're in a better position than they are." And nobody really listens to him. He dies under mysterious circumstances. He was potentially the front runner to be the president. Like, why weren't they heeding that advice and go? Because if Russia was the biggest threat, the suspicious side of me wonders, like, oh, okay, since this beast of the military industrial complex was built up during World War II, like, did they let Russia consolidate and regather their strength so that we could justify spending on this Cold War for the next couple decades, or was it just a stupid decision?
Yeah, it's pretty complicated. I mean, imagine we'd been through. It was just a few years. Our involvement in World War II was only 3 years,
Yeah.
less than 3 years, even though it seems like a huge amount of time looking back on it in history. But we were attacked in December 41. We didn't really mobilize till late 42. And then, so we're going 43, 44, and then the first half of 45.
Hmm.
So 2.5 years, but it was an effort by the whole country. But all of that carnage, all of that sacrifice. We've defeated Hitler, and Stalin was our ally. And come on, you really are you crazy? We're going to invade. Not even Napoleon could take Moscow. What are you talking about? So I can see that a lot of the public is saying enough. We don't want nothing to do with this. Truman, who had been vice president, he was never clued in on any war plans. He didn't know about the atom bomb until after he became president. But well, a couple things. You had Franklin Roosevelt was kind of like Joe Biden toward the end of toward his fourth term.
Yeah,
He
I'm not
was
a big
not
fan.
coherent. He couldn't think for himself. He had people designing how the post-war world would look at Yalta when he went there with Stalin and Churchill. And who did he put in charge of that? Of coordinating that whole strategy with the Soviets? He put a State Department policy planning guy named Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss was a Soviet agent. Alger Hiss was shaping U.S. government strategy for the post-war period on Stalin's terms.
Unbelievable. How the hell that? I've always heard things about FDR being surrounded by socialists or by being surrounded by Marxists or even him himself. Like, so what happened with that?
Well, if he was surrounded by socialists, like big deal. Okay,
Yeah,
they're not. Yeah, they're against property rights and but no, he was surrounded by controlled Soviet agents. So it's not just people who had a different idea. It's people who had a different loyalty to a different country. And he had around him Harry Dexter White. He had his best friend in the White House, Harry Hopkins. There's a debate on whether or not he was a Soviet agent. He probably wasn't, but he certainly was. His inner circle were almost all Soviet agents, the most influential ones. And he was living in the White House, kind of like Valerie Jarrett was with Obama, and running policy. And wait, where were Valerie Jarrett's parents? What party did they belong to before they went to Iran?
which party?
to the Communist Party USA. So this stuff has a heredity to it. It goes back and forth for generations. So back then, now during World War II, you had the OSS, which was our Office of Strategic Services. It was our foreign intelligence service. They did some awesome stuff against the Nazis.
Really? Didn't they learn from the Nazis? Like, weren't they kind of modeled after the Nazis, the OSS?
No, they were modeled after the British Secret Service.
Okay.
Actually, the Nazis took their system from the Soviets when they were at peace with the Soviets in the 30s. They sent Gruppenführer Mueller, who founded the Gestapo, went to Stalin to say, "Hey, how can we copy this?" And that's how it came about. No, so our OSS was modeled by the British because we didn't have a foreign intelligence service, and the British, who were already in the war, said, "You guys need one. Can we help you set it up?"
So
Or not
MI6
can
you're
we help
talking
you
about.
set it up? Let us help you set it up. So there was a fantastic British agent named William Stevenson. His code name was Intrepid, and he set it up. But he had his deputy at the British Embassy in Washington. His name was Dickie Ellis. Help set up the OSS, but nobody knew at the time that Dickie Ellis was a double agent working for Stalin.
Come on.
So the British intelligence officer who helped set up our wartime OSS was actually an agent for Stalin. And what did Donovan do? He was a smart guy, sharp guy, real patriot, hard charging guy, anti-communist also. But he was so focused on fighting the Nazis that he wasn't looking at the bigger threat. Because by 43, it was clear that Hitler was going to fall.
Yeah.
He wasn't really looking at that. So his executive officer ended up being a Soviet agent. This was all revealed in intercepts that were declassified back in 1995. So there were people, there were known and unknown agents across the government giving advice on this. So to get back to your question, why didn't Patton succeed with this idea? Just most people weren't into it. And then a lot of people were saying, no, that's foolish. Let's just have stability. And some of them were well-minded, but a lot of them were working for Stalin.
That's unbelievable. Like, so you're talking about Wild Bill Donovan, the guy who like ran the OSS, and then so intelligence agency has somebody from the Soviet Union, then FDR has somebody from the Soviet Union around him. And so I'm assuming we didn't have anybody on their side, or like the British MI6 didn't have anybody on their side either. So were they superior to us in terms of like I guess they were superior to us because
we didn't have an intelligence service at the time. We had Navy and Army intelligence, but no real like CIA version until
When did
after
theirs
World-
start? When,
Which
like,
ones?
was this KGB you're talking that was infiltrating us?
Yeah, the KGB started in December 1917, and
Oh
their whole
wow.
but they had a mission because they began as an underground movement, the Bolsheviks did. So they knew how to operate clandestinely and how to do all the nasty, dirty tricks and for a revolutionary purpose to take power. Then they applied that to expand their power, to infiltrate not just Russian Tsarist society, because they infiltrated all the way up to the top in the Romanov royal family, or near the top. So, and then they had a Russian civil war after this, the anti-communist Russians against the Bolsheviks, but the anti-communists were all divided against themselves and they didn't have money. So how did the
Mm.
anti-communists get their money? The Bolsheviks gave them the money so that they could then identify all of the anti-communist leaders and people
Wow.
and they say, and then they were saying they were using the money. The Bolsheviks weren't, like, the anti-communists didn't know. They just knew that this really wealthy guy is giving us money. And so they started bringing people back from exile who would have been a big influence in against the Bolsheviks. They would have had a wonderful popular support. So they were lured back into Russia where they were all assassinated. It was a long multi-year operation that went on through the 1920s.
They were
So
clever, those Bolsheviks.
yeah, and devious. So they don't have the same moral mindset where, you're going too far on something. No, it's by any means necessary for them. So we're limited by laws and by Judeo-Christian values and by just the Enlightenment and these other values that did not limit the Bolsheviks or the Soviets or the Nazis or the jihadists.
So who was funding the Bolsheviks? Because I've like a pattern I've realized over like looking at the revolutions and stuff is that very few revolutions are organic. Like a lot of them are funded, get a lot of money from somewhere. I've seen stuff about Wall Street funneling money to the Bolsheviks. I've seen stuff about like a Jewish tie-ins. So I don't know, so where do you attribute their source of power and planning and their ability to be so organized?
Yeah. Well, at first they just resorted to bank robbery, extortion, crime, but this is when they were an underground movement. But when the time came to overthrow the czar,
Czar.
that was
Mhm.
in early 1917, but it was a socialist movement that overthrew the czar and then had the first Duma, the parliament.
Yeah.
But they still wanted to. This World War I's going on at this time, and
Right.
the Tsarist Russian government was allied with the British and with us to fight the Germans.
Hmm.
The socialists who overthrow the Tsar also said, we're going to continue the war because they were patriotic Russians. We're just going to continue. The Bolsheviks said that because they were hiding out, their leaders were hiding out in Switzerland, and Leon Trotsky was hiding out in New York.
Lenin was one of them too, right? He was
Yeah,
exiled.
so Lenin and they were in Switzerland, which was neutral. And
Mm-hmm.
they let word be known that if they were helped to take power, they would pull Russia out of the war. That would free up the
Oh,
Germans so they wouldn't have to fight a two-front war on the Russian front to the east and then the Western front to the British and the Americans and the Canadians and the others in France. So this was a great deal for the Germans. So it was the
shit.
German general staff of the military, the high command, that brought Lenin and his group out of Switzerland on a sealed train that legend says went straight from Switzerland to St. Petersburg. They actually stopped in Germany to cut the final deal and to load a lot of money aboard the trains to fund the revolution. So the German general staff ran that as an operation that they thought would just get Russia out of the war. They didn't think the Bolsheviks would win. But the German central bank did the funding along with a lot of German bankers who were multinational bankers with branches in the United States. And they had debts or they had loans or other forms of exchange with banks around the world. And so it's not that American banks funded the Bolshevik Revolution, but it was part of an international banking system that existed even then. So those were the main funders of this. And then you had industrialists like Julius Hammer. He was a radical. He was an American who helped fund it, small scale compared to what the Germans were doing. But his son Armand Hammer then became super wealthy through the Soviet Union by being the Soviet agent in the West to be doing these business deals. He became fabulously wealthy and then infiltrated American politics. and
Mm.
funded a lot of politicians to make them prosperous, as well as to make sure they could stay in office and help him out when he needed it.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. I do remember hearing that on one of Dan Carlin's hardcore history things. I think the guy's name was Ludendorff or something. That was the German high general that did that. Was there
Yeah.
any stuff with the like Rothschild banks? Like you said, German central bank. I know that I think they had a charter there. I always look for Rothschild stuff, especially with Switzerland and like the Bank of International Settlements that became more of a thing in World War II. Is it like, does it go to that level of nefarious, or is it just like a strategic military thing?
On the German side, it was strategic military. The Rothschild Bank is a British bank.
Well, they had a
But
few
see,
different, because all the brothers had a different one in different countries, right?
right, but I mean, it's British now. What here's the other thing: when you had monarchies, the
Mm-hmm.
British monarchs were the cousins of the Russian monarchs,
Mm-hmm.
but they were also the British monarchs were ethnic German.
Mm-hmm. And the Kaiser was related to them too. The Kaiser's
Yeah,
like
the
from the
Kaiser
king.
was yeah.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah, so there are all these family. Really, World War I was just a giant family squabble when you think about it.
Yeah, because
In a sick way,
yeah.
the Bolsheviks came and then made it even worse, and then blew it all up even more. And then Switzerland is in the middle of Europe, where so much of the confidential banking is done. And the Swiss, they've never been invaded in 600 years because they've always been neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's doing whatever banking they can in Switzerland, and the Swiss are just like, fine, bank with us. We'll just, so they're profiteering from everybody.
Yeah. How do they stay like? Are they just literally the only country that always stays neutral? Because I've always found it fascinating that like even if you look at a map of World War II, like all the places that were occupied by the Nazis, just like this one little dot that's not occupied by them in Switzerland.
Mhm.
Is it
Not
just
even
because they?
Hitler could invade. Well, if you go there, it's really, really mountainous in a big,
Mm,
long crescent of the Alps. And so if you see the Swiss Alps like the Matterhorn, that's you can't invade that with regular troops. You don't have enough aircraft to do it. The Swiss didn't have airfields to service this, so you need troops to go in and build the airfields first.
oh
So
wow.
there was no way to invade Switzerland. So if it's going to be neutral, fine. But the Swiss were also biased toward us in World War II. When our down flyers they'd be able to crash land into Switzerland over the border. The Swiss would rescue them and treat them well, but they also let somebody whose name you raised earlier, Alan Dulles, do his thing
Mm,
there. Alan Dulles was an OSS man running
mm,
operations out of Switzerland, and the Swiss let him do it.
hmm. Interesting. Okay. Well, so now that you bring up Dulles, we talked about the FBI a little bit. So CIA, when does it really get crazy with them? Because like I've heard a lot of stuff with like Dulles, George H.W. Bush, JFK, and all that. Like, when did the CIA kind of make the evil turn? You hear stuff about like you heard Operation Gladio. Yeah, so crazy
Yeah,
stuff with that, where they're involved
yeah.
with the mafia and the Vatican, drug dealing, money laundering, and stuff. So, like when does that all get out of control?
Well, it all depends on what your point of view is. So if you're sympathetic to the Soviets, it started out of control because its mission was to contain communism. So therefore it's bad, and everything it does is bad. And if you have bankers at the top of the CIA, well, they're bad because they're capitalists and they're using the US government to spread capitalism worldwide, or defend capitalism at home, which, well, that's kind of what our government structures are for, is to defend our republican system, which is based on a capitalist form of economics. But the thing is, though, so it all depends on what your point of view is. And then
Oh,
it's a nasty, nasty war. You're fighting against people who are steeped in this by any means necessary mentality of using, now that both sides have the atomic bomb and then the
right.
hydrogen bomb. Um, we can't fight a war like World War II again. It's too costly for anybody, even for the Soviet side. So we have gone nuclear. Well,
Right.
how do you wage conflict then if the Soviet system is a messianic system that wants to spread communism around the world and destroy capitalistic free societies? They do it through subversion. So they've like the
Mm,
way they'd already done it through the communist parties, but now they're going all around the world and subverting places where we do our trade, where we have our markets, where we, any normal commerce, where we also have a belief system that, well, in the American hemisphere, where since 1823 with the Monroe Doctrine, we're not going to let foreign European powers that was aimed at the European powers because there were no big Asian powers then. We're not going to let them have beachheads in our hemisphere. We're just going to keep it, a region that's never going to be threatening to us. So what are you going to have to do when these very subversive and highly trained and dedicated foreign governments, like starting with the Soviet Union, we're doing this? You have to fight fire with fire. So how do you do that? You do it with secret intelligence. So the first purpose of the CIA was to collect intelligence from around the world that we wouldn't get. It's secret stuff that we're not supposed to know. And you get that, you collect that intelligence, all that information, and you cultivate sources in those countries to keep providing you with information. Some of them you pay, some of them do it because they have common interests, so they're happy to help. Some are going to do it because it furthers their own interests, and some are blackmailed into it. And some are sent to penetrate us for the purpose of doubling our people and turning ourselves against ourselves. So you have all this going on. And well, how did the world, what were the best ways of getting information then? It was through the banking system. These were people who'd done business, companies that had done business together for centuries, and then bankers who had done business together for generations. And this is where the Dulles brothers come in, and so many of these other Rockefellers come in. David Rockefeller, for all his many, many, many faults, he had vice president positions in the Chase Manhattan Bank in all of its branches around the world, just for CIA officers. And he would allow CIA officers to build their way up through the bank, get different positions in the bank. So it's like, before there was LinkedIn, you could still track people's careers if you tried really hard. So this was to provide them with a lifetime of cover. So they just look and act like bankers. He can't be a CIA man. He's just been a banker. We've checked his entire career.
Wow.
And they make friends. They provide loans to the locals. They help fund things at the local level. People come to them. They go to all the best parties. And that's where you get a lot of great information that you're never meant to know. And so this was a great intelligence collection effort that was built up by these families who knew how to do it for the banks. Now they were applying it to the benefit of the United States. But then it gets to a point, well, who's benefiting from whom? So you can tolerate some degree of symbiosis where you let the banks profit off this as long as the American people and the USA itself benefits as well. It gets to the point of, is the banks running us or are we running those things? And that's when it gets dicey. And then what about overthrowing governments? There's, most of the information about CIA operations in the 50s and 60s to overthrow foreign governments comes from the far left from the 50s and 60s, or really in the 70s when a lot of this was exposed. It was the people making the biggest noise about it happened to be supporters of these same revolutionary movements, Viet Cong, North Vietnamese, Fidel Castro, all the Yasser Arafat and the PLO. They sympathized with them and they didn't like anything the CIA was doing against them. So the narrative about what happened was skewed in the popular understanding. But if you look at 1953 in Iran, think of, our economy. I mean, we were producing plenty of oil on our own. The Soviets hadn't really exploited their oil industry yet. They had their eyes on Iran. Stalin did. He died in 53, but he was funding a large covert movement there. But Iran was a pro-Western country, and it was very important to our allies, the British. So the NATO alliance is brand new. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Anglophone alliance of larger English-speaking countries, UK, US, Canada, New Zealand, small but still important in the Pacific, Australia. They became the Five Eyes, those five English-speaking countries with the intelligence services. The intelligence alliance is called Five Eyes. This was all vital now to our security because most of our trade had been with Asia. Now it's largely with also Europe, but it all depends on making sure the Soviets don't take control of fuel and resources and populations. So when a guy like Mossadegh was elected in 1953 in Iran, he was going to turn Iran over to make it a Soviet republic. And he had people around. He was not a communist himself, but the people around him were. So it was logical. You don't want to invade. You don't want to have the Soviets take it over, start a war for Iran. Let's just boot the guy, help Iranians who want to get rid of him, restore the royal family in Iran, and we'll have a pro-Western Iran again. So it was a very simple thing that didn't cost any American lives, and it had a high impact, and it succeeded for decades.
Wow.
Until it stopped.
So I, I guess I could see that like when they're genuinely trying to fight communism, then that's something I get behind. But they're genuinely trying to fight Bolshevikism. But how do we go from that to like right now, where it seems like they're more on the side of communism and like subverting people who are the ones that are actually trying to stop the Marxist type of things? Like, so where did that flip take place?
So, and this gets back to big intel from Cold War heroes to deep state
Yeah.
villains. There was a lot of heroic stuff, but then what happened? And it wasn't just Marxism, it's this deep state itself, which isn't CIA per se, or isn't FBI per se. It's elements in there that are working as their own secret societies or cartels, or they're working in a sub rosa way to keep permanent control and to not be accountable to anybody. That's what the danger is.
Mm-hmm. The
And
bureaucrats.
and really, yeah, but think of it. If you're left to your own devices with no laws and no morals and nobody, and you have unlimited cash, what are any of us going to do if we don't have boundaries imposed on us somehow, and somebody watching to make sure that we don't, do terrible things to other people?
And push them to
It's
the limit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a human trait. Now imagine a bunch of your best friends getting together with you, and you have all this, and nobody is looking at you while everyone's throwing other people's money at you. You're going to be doing even wilder things than you would on your own. And then you're going to make friends with other groups. And then you're going to have rivals. Well, let's all get together on this guy to get rid of these guys and maybe co-opt some of their best people. It's a natural thing. And this is what happens in governments and in bureaucracies. So where you have the case of there was never a real oversight hearing of the FBI during J. Edgar Hoover's 48 years running the bureau.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he died in 72, there were hearings in 76. There was the Church Committee in the Senate by Senator Frank Church to just really dig into the CIA. And there was the Pike Committee in the House to do the same with the FBI in 1976. That was 49 years ago.
Wow.
There has never been another congressional oversight investigation like that since. So you're talking a century. And the only oversight was halfway through and only for a year and a half.
That's bizarre.
And then
Like,
you have
wouldn't-
USAID, founded in 1961.
Yeah.
The only investigative hearing I could find was from 2011, and it lasted a day.
So how does Congress like not have the will to do this? Like who's like encouraging them to look the other way, or like are they afraid of these things?
Well, look, say USAID, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
you just hate poor people. You want to rake USAID over the coals when it's helping Black children and single moms around the world? You're a racist.
Right.
That's what they would say, right?
Yeah.
No, we're just looking at corruption and fraud. No, you're just a racist. And it's like, well,
Without the
how
Doge,
do you
it's
fight
tough.
that?
Right. Without
But
the
you don't
Doge,
go
it goes in the payments, it's tough. I guess I could see that because like now, like it's hard to like call that out without showing the stupid stuff they're spending money on, and you don't have access to that without Doge doing what it's doing.
Yeah, or it's just anecdotal and okay, it's a huge budget. Of course, there's going to be waste here, but it's doing good stuff. So just don't discredit them. That's just going to hurt things.
Right.
You don't want to hurt. Only a sick person would undermine providing clean water to poor people in Guatemala.
So with the church and the Pike Committee, did they find a lot of crazy stuff? How long did those hearings last? The Pike was
They lasted
FBI.
about a year and a half,
Okay.
a little less.
Sure.
And the church committee had over 130 lawyers and investigators and editors and writers and everything else, and so they 130 of them. So when a few years ago, when the House created a subcommittee on weaponization, they said this is just going to be like the church committee.
Mm-hmm.
You know how large their staff was?
Oh.
5.
What the hell? What a joke.
Yeah. Now, on the
So-
bright side, 2 of them were FBI agents who couldn't stand all the wokeness in the FBI, so they went to work for Jim Jordan on the weaponization committee. They did a great job. They're back in the FBI now, running the place until cash gets in.
Oh wow.
So at least some good's coming out of it. But so you had FBI. So I've talked to a lot of congressmen and senators over the years. I used to work in the House and the Senate, and as of even 2 years ago, they're afraid of digging in too deeply. And
Wow.
some of them think they don't have the right to.
Hmm.
Because I mean, a lot
Really?
of these guys, yeah, you've got egomaniacs and creepy people and so forth, but even liberal and conservative and even the rhinos, you've got a lot of modest, people of essentially good character who, in their own minds, are trying to do the right thing. They're not malicious people, even if we hate what they are saying or doing. They're trying to do things for the right reasons. But so there's still a sense of humility about, say, a senator from a rural state. Let's say they think, well, I'm just a I'm just a hog farmer. What do I know about the CIA? I've got no right to ask questions. Or the Judiciary Committee. Well, there's one hog farmer on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's chairman of it, Senator Chuck Grassley, and he doesn't have that. Even though he's a self-effacing guy, he's been very aggressive after the FBI. But for most of his long term in the Senate, he's been in the minority, so he hasn't been able to call the shots. But a lot of
Hmm.
these people, so they feel ignorant about what to do. They can't really hire a lot of good staff because congressional salaries aren't that much. And it takes a really dedicated person who either has a lot of money, say independently wealthy, or has a spouse who works or who's wealthy, because DC is a very expensive area to live in,
Yeah.
partly only because of all the government salaries and government contracting. But
Yep.
so you don't have the real professional staff in Congress to hold these hearings, and then people's attention spans are so narrow.
Right.
And you're going to alienate a lot of political donors by digging too far into this. So for USAID, if you look at the way the subcommittee to provide the money to USAID and the subcommittee to oversee how that money is spent, you'll see a lot of those congressmen and senators are from states and districts where they have big contracting businesses there. So they're really representing those industries in Congress and then supervising how they're spending their own money.
That's hilarious.
Wouldn't you like to have that for for yourself? So you can see how USAID became this big mess, and then it so when and it's not just Democrats who are to blame. A lot of Republicans went along with this for years because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, with USAID having been set up to fight this, or for
Mhm.
that matter, the FBI and the CIA,
Yeah.
they were wondering, well, where do we go now? What do we do? And it's not like, well, let's just pack up our tents and go home because
No.
there's a whole career here. Or there's the greedy side of it, but there's also the do-gooder side of it. Well, we still have so much more good to do elsewhere. So, but it was President Clinton who persuaded Congress then, um, look, use foreign aid to bring money home to your districts.
Huh.
The Clinton officials were open about this, telling
Wow.
members of Congress, get on those committees and bring money back to your districts. And that's when this whole mafia type of contractor industrial complex really sprang up, when it was very small before. This is where it got out of control. And of course, they would not hire people like you and me. Actually, they brought me on as an expert for tiny short-term contracts. And then when I found out that this was in Moscow right after the Soviet collapse, and I was using the church committee architecture and the philosophy behind the whole thought structure behind it to help the Russian parliament, which was then pro-US before Putin's time, to help them set up their own church committees to rip out the whole wiring of the KGB and expose everything. That never happened because in large part, the person that USAID in Moscow hired to vet the Russians who could be part of the program,
Mhm.
she was
So
a judge on the KGB secret tribunals.
come on.
She threw into the gulag the very people that I was trying to get in to get USAID help for them to set up this oversight committee against the KGB. So literally, and so I blew the whistle on this, and then it's like, you're gone.
Unbelievable. That's crazy.
So this has been going back decades. I wrote about this in public in 1996 in Reader's Digest, which was in the biggest magazine in the world. And I
Oh,
wrote about
wow.
this, and the State Department issued a huge long diatribe tearing apart the whole article. And then I went back and rebutted all them, and they didn't even argue with me on some of those things.
Wow.
And then who was the number two at USAID at the time? Sally Shelton.
Who's that?
She was one of these ambassadors. She got these posts to the Caribbean and so forth. Well, when she was ambassador, she was having an affair with a Cuban intelligence officer who was an ambassador. She was going on for a long time with this affair that was public. So she was recruited by Cuban intelligence to go back in and then run USAID.
Unbelievable. What the hell?
Yeah. I just posted on X a few days ago. Somebody else pointed out to me, as of the past year or so, USAID was funding the daughter of the founder of Fidel Castro's intelligence service,
What?
hiring her as a consultant to run democracy training programs in Cuba. So it's not like she's in exile and she's turned against it.
Like it's so much crazier than we ever could have imagined. I don't.
It gets worse. But to see all this stuff coming out now, and to see what the DOGE team is doing, they're doing just what these young Russians were doing in the Soviet collapse, who were ransacking KGB offices, pulling out documents, giving them to dissident journalists who were just sick of all of this, and just throwing everything out in the public in this chaotic way. So they were doing with paper what DOGE is doing with electrons to bring this out. And then look at this stuff we're just starting to learn right now. And it's only, what, 2.5 weeks?
Well, on the scale of like how mind blown or outraged we are by things that we find, like where do you think we are right now as far as like the potential that's there to be mind blown and outraged?
Oh, we barely scratched the surface.
So hit me with like a crazy prediction or something. Like I'm thinking like once we start cracking open the books on like Medicare, Medicaid, the defense contracts and stuff, like then like things are really going to get crazy.
Think of the fraud. Now, here, USAID is, only 47, 50 billion, whatever, roughly.
Yeah.
50 billion a year. That's almost 3 times the CIA budget. Okay, so
USA three times bigger, 3 times smaller.
Yeah, 3 times bigger. USAID's budget is 3 times bigger than the CIA budget.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah. So you've got that. Think of the Pentagon budget, which is $1 trillion plus. Think of the Department of Health and Human Services, which is what?
1.6, 1.7
much bigger
trillion.
than the Pentagon. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're saying there's no fraud in there?
Yeah. Okay.
when the Pentagon couldn't pass an audit for 7 years in a row and can't account for $35 trillion in taxpayer money. Are you serious? Look at it. Think of all the healthcare fraud already. That's just gets out there. It's nothing compared to what's going to be found. This is one of the reasons why there was such bitter opposition to RFK Jr. as Health and Human Services. Not just because he was the black sheep of the Kennedy family, if we're allowed to say that word anymore, and he thought differently, and he had weird conspiracy theories or whatever they're saying about him. And he would stand up to big pharma, which that's totally understandable, where somebody who goes in to stand up to big pharma is already painting a target on himself, and tons of money are going to come after him.
Right.
But there's much more money than big pharma at stake here.
Oh yeah. The health insurance companies.
Yeah. The insurance. Where is that? New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut. Okay. So that's Elizabeth Warren. That's, that's the senators from Connecticut. That's Chuck Schumer. They're going to be protecting this. This is why they're going so crazy. And Schumer, he's no longer his smug, self-assured self, is he?
He's in panic mode. He's like belligerent.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And his best friends and his money people are pounding him, saying, Chuck, you got to do something about it. He's like, I can't. I'm not controlling the Senate anymore. Chuck, you talk a big game. You're not doing anything at all. And so it's such a joy to see. But there's so much joyful stuff to see. It's like sending a kid to Disneyland for an hour and then saying it's time to go home. You can see what's there, but there's so much more to see and do.
Oh my God, no, every day is insane.
We won't know. I bet we won't know for 100 years the extent of all of this. And by then,
really? Really? Like the extent of the fraud?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because it's so extensive. Think of the doctors who prescribe things unnecessarily because they get $20 back from the pharmaceutical company for every prescription that they do. Some of the doctors do it with good intent, but we know there are ones who don't and just drug people up. So they're making even most of their salary from prescribing.
So who's incentivized?
All that?
Right. well, who's incentivized from the government side to let that continue? Because I see the incentive for the doctor, I see the incentive for the insurance companies, but for the government, how's the kickback make its way to them? Like for letting the system be so sloppy and out of control.
Because
You
if
see what I
you
mean?
if you're in a system, your job is to make things run. Your
Hmm.
job is not to hold things up. Then you become
Mm,
a problem.
right.
Then you're like, nobody wants to talk to you because you're going to screw up things, and you might even tell. And you might even get an audit done. That's going to mess up everybody. So it just go on because it's only money and it's not their money.
Yeah.
And it's money in the abstract, and you're dealing with these numbers. And can you or I conceptualize $1 billion?
No, probably
How about
not.
$1 trillion?
Definitely not.
Yeah. I was lucky enough to see $1 million once sitting on a pallet, or millions of dollars on a pallet. But you can fit $1 million in freshly printed $100 bills into a carry-on bag for a plane. So that's what $1 million looks like. $1 billion is 1,000 times that.
Right. I saw a visual of that once, like where it's like a million is like you said, like a carry-on bag, then a billion's like one of those pallets that the forklifts carry out of the store, and then a trillion is like a football field with
Yeah,
100 bills on it.
yeah.
Or like then in terms of stacking it up, it's like a million is the height of a desk chair, then a billion is the height of a skyscraper, then a trillion touches the moon.
Yeah, something like and then our whole budget or deficit goes to the sun or something crazy. I don't know the exact metaphor, but it's something. So we can't even imagine what all of this is. And so for these folks, they're just looking at money. It's just numbers. It's just this, and few of them really sit back to think we're spending the money of these hardworking citizens, and not only that, we're doing deficit spending that people not even born are going to have to pay
Yep.
back.
Yep. That's such a crime. Well, I mean, this has been awesome so far. Can I ask one more question? And then, and yeah. All right. So did you see that Trump said that he's offering to buy out the entire CIA, like anybody who's willing to take the offer in the next 8 months?
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
It's a good idea. I wrote in Big Intel that they should just simply abolish positions and chop back the CIA by a lot because there's so much bloat. There's so much,
Mhm.
we don't need secret intelligence to spy on gender
Mhm.
and to spy on the
Yeah.
climate. And we don't need
Yeah.
a whole part of the secret intelligence service to do open source intelligence, which means using public information. Anybody can do that. You 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 need the CIA. You need a smaller, leaner CIA that produces information that's actually useful to the presidents. Almost every previous president since there's been a president's daily brief said it wasn't really useful to me most of the time to make my decisions. And for those
Mm.
I know people who've written the daily briefs and who've delivered them to the president, and even they say it's all like lowest common denominator stuff. So it's if you're not creating a useful product, why are you having a giant system collecting intelligence to provide that product to and similar products to the president? So cut it down. The same thing
Yeah.
with the clandestine service. We need a clandestine service. We've got about 1,500 CIA officers in the clandestine service abroad. So this is your undercover stuff. We need that. So I was in a group talking with a bunch of former CIA station chiefs, and I said, "Well, that 1,500, I bet you could slash it by 2/3 and do a lot more with 500 good clandestine service guys." And they kind of looked at each other and laughed. And then one of them said, "Take a zero off that." And
Wow.
literally, and they all agreed.
Wow.
50
So
of them.
what, 50?
If we had
Jeez.
50 of them, we don't need the other 1,450. And you have a neat, uh, professional, elite clandestine service, and then you can grow it out from that as needed. So right now it's just bloat. So you can chop away at the CIA. So if you're incentivizing people to leave, I'm
It's a good
afraid that
start.
the good ones might accept it and then go into banking or into big tech or something. So we risk having a loss there, but yeah, but like your DEI hires, they won't have a job, so it's in their interests to take this, and it can only be through the end of the fiscal year, which is September. So it really saves the taxpayer money because they'd be on the payroll anyway, but they won't be
Yeah.
next year if they take the
Right.
buyout.
That's a good point. There are going to be a lot of people that literally just can't get a job, like that have worked in government their whole time and were DEI
Oh,
hires.
you would be
Wow.
you'd be horrified. You really,
Really? Yeah, I hear horror stories all the time.
yeah. And that's not to put down the really awesome people who are in there. And it's not just your tactical guys who go out and kill terrorists and say that's separate from the standing clandestine service. Those are great, but you've got great linguists, but a huge shortage of them. Great analysts who do find stuff. But if the CIA has a history of not predicting the Soviet hydrogen bomb or the takedown of the Berlin Wall or how things were really going in Vietnam or the Soviet collapse, when my friends and I were for months and months and months saying the Soviet Union is going to collapse internally. And then a few of us arranged, we were in the Kremlin the day the day Russia seceded from the USSR and declared the Soviet Union is gone.
Wow,
We were there.
really?
And we were with the guys who were ransacking the Russians, who were ransacking the KGB offices and collecting a lot of their materials. So you could, if you had people out there, it's easy to know. But the CIA people were hiding in the embassy and doing whatever the Russian officials were saying and not really paying attention to what's happening on the ground. You need those kinds of people back in the CIA, and you don't have them because it's become very risk averse. If you make a mistake, that's a mark against you. If that mark is against you, you don't get promoted.
Oh, geez, that's terrible.
And then there are other people who say, you know what? I love my job so much, focusing on this entity in this country that, that's very important to do. I don't want a promotion. I want to stay doing this. But under the rules, if you're not promoted in a certain amount of time, you have to leave the service.
Really? Wow. That's bizarre.
Yeah. So, and then throw wokeness on top of that.
Oh my God, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. So you really have to do what they're doing right now. There's really no other choice.
Good. Yeah. I mean, I hope we can trim it down by a good 60, 70% in the next 2 years. That'd be ideal. But man, Dr. Wallace, this has been fascinating. Here, let me show you guys where to find your book. And guys, deeply encourage you to get this book here. So big intel, how the CIA and FBI went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. You get on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description. Dr. Waller, this has been awesome. I would love to do it again sometime. I have a million more questions I could ask. Thank you so much.
It was fun talking to you.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, have a great night. I'll see you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys. So I'll do a quick rundown of what happened today in the world. So Trump comes out and says it is time to edit the Pentagon. By the way, what'd you guys think of that? Did you enjoy that? I thought that was really cool. I thought that was a lot better than the other night. I thought that was super interesting. So this is what the thumbnail was about today. It wasn't clickbait. It wasn't clickbait.
President, I wonder what you make of the criticism from Democrats that these staff reductions, the cuts that Elon Musk and DOGE are doing are an unlawful power grab. And is there anything you've told Elon Musk he cannot touch?
Well, we haven't discussed that much. I'll tell him to go here, go there. He does it. He's got a very capable group of people. Very, very capable. They know what they're doing. They'll ask questions and they'll see immediately as somebody gets tongue-tied that they're either crooked or don't know what they're doing. We have very smart people going in. So I've instructed him go into education, go into military, go into other things as we go along. And they're finding massive amounts of fraud, abuse, waste, all of these things. So, but I will pick out a target and I say go in. There could be areas that we won't, but I think everything's fertile. You know, we're a government. We have to be open. And as an open government, I don't know, I guess you could say maybe some high intelligence or something. And I'll do that myself if I have to. But generally speaking, I'll just say go. But he will be looking at education pretty quickly, and he will be looking at military too.
So I'm putting in the poll real quick. Did you enjoy Dr. Waller? Yes. No. Let me know. So this is like some JFK territory type of words here. So he's saying straight up, we're going to check out the Pentagon. That's dangerous territory. Saying we're going to check out the Department of Education. Not as dangerous, but probably just as corrupt. I mean, there's a reason that we saw this video come out today where you're this All the crazy people are
They know that we are here. Max, ask the
protesting.
question again. That's important.
Were you told, are you making this decision to stand in front of this door on your own behalf, on behalf of the Department of Education, or were you told to come out here and block members of Congress from going to the desk?
Doing my job.
So everybody's freelancing.
What is that?
We're doing our jobs.
We're trying to save you.
It's non-responsive.
Show them your ID. Were you told to stand here, or did you decide to stand here and block members of Congress from entering the Department of Education?
Access
To federal buildings.
rules. We're allowed in there.
Thank you,
So a
Denise.
private security contractor
Do you know who members of Congress are?
members of
We're all
Congress.
members of Congress.
Maybe he
They
doesn't
pretty much just
understand. You
Up
stand here and break this
security.
guy's balls for like 5 minutes straight. They're upset that they're not being allowed in the buildings. They want to go complain about having the Department of Education budget cut or have the thing abolished. But they have no right to be in the building. They have to set an appointment. The building has is under the executive branch for who gets to say who goes in the building and whatnot. But so you guys like the guest, huh? I thought he was a lot better than the other night. The other night was a little rough. Oh, thank you, Condom Dog. Condom Dog. Just for you, I was able to arrange that your favorite guest is going to be coming on soon. You know who I'm talking about. TRC says, yeah. So, are you guys more excited about the Medicare, Medicaid stuff being audited or the Pentagon being audited? Like, I think the Pentagon's cooler, but the healthcare stuff is going to be crazier, though. Oh, and then, so let's see. This is what was going down today in terms of the reaction to what's going on.
To agree that Musk is a problem, but listen to them today, and they have a piñata in search of a stick.
To our Republican colleagues, if you do not see the light, we will bring the fire. Resist!
We are going to be in your face. We are going to be on your asses.
We have days to stop the destruction of our democracy. We have work to do. Tell Elon Musk to take his hands off your money. We don't pledge allegiance to the creepy 22-year-olds working for Elon Musk. We pledge allegiance to the United States of America.
And goddamn it, shut down the city! We are at war!
We will win. We will win. We will win.
Gretchen.
Yes,
So,
they need
Can we
the
play it
Democrats.
again?
The Democrats need a real leader. Okay, they need a real leader, which currently does not exist in the Democratic Party, and they have been caught completely flat-footed with the entire Trump presidency for the last 2 weeks and Elon Musk. I said on CNN months ago that Elon Musk would be the most influential advisor to President Trump, and that is proving to be true, whether you like it or not. But Democrats should have had a plan for this. They knew it was coming. We say this every single night.
2025.
We knew it.
Just talked about.
We knew it. Trump has said all of these things were going to happen. We saw him align with Elon Musk, which may go down as the smartest thing that any presidential candidate has ever done, from the young vote to tech to a million other things. So Democrats needed to have a plan, and it may be too late.
Yeah, Bakari, are you fired up after?
I'm fired up and ready to go. Can't you see it in my face?
Damn, so even when CNN's making fun of the Democrats, it's over. But I just don't understand how they're not mad about money being wasted. Like, I guess that's a Stockholm syndrome thing, but like, unless they're directly giving that money to you and you're on the Democrat side, like, how are you not pissed off about like the value of your money being slashed because of inflation spending? I don't know. And then Big Balls got
a 19-year-old high school.
You saw the Big Balls thing. Big Balls got fired for a second today. I don't know if you saw that. Look,
graduate who has used the unfortunate nickname Big Balls online. So that would be one way that we could refer to him. He is now working at Musk's behest inside DOGE. And we looked into his background. And so we found, several notable things, Aaron, one of which is that this individual has founded multiple companies, including one with another unfortunate name, Tesla.Sexy LLC, which he established in 2021. He would have been around 16 years old. Now, this LLC controls dozens of web domains.
All right, so you saw that, but then I guess it came out that he said some slightly racist tweet or whatever. And JD Vance made clear he wanted big balls to be brought back. And then Elon put up a poll. The poll spoke for the people. 78% said bring him back. So he is back. So not to worry about that. And I guess if you guys don't have any crazy questions, which I always encourage you to throw some crazy questions in there. The happiest thing I saw today is that Trump declared that paper straws are now banned. Now banned. So we're back in a world where we could have plastic straws. So if that's not a win, I don't know what is. Any crazy questions? This is a chance to ask me a question not on Minnect. Let's see. We got, what time is it? 9:17. Hit me with a crazy question before 9:20, and then could extend this thing. But not, I'm gonna go hit the gym and do some Friday stuff. So let's see. I bookmarked a bunch of stuff to talk about, and I'll kill time with that until somebody throws a crazy question in there. Oh, let me put my Minnect in the chat. I didn't do that yet today. By the way, I was telling Steve P the other night that I'm gonna have Steve P on the show because seems like a cool guy, and I think that's a good way to use him in Minnect. Like, you guys have interest in being on with me, bringing a topic to the table, or even just like not being on it, like suggesting a topic to go down, suggesting a guest. Minnect is a good thing for that. So here it is in the chat. Let's see. Garbage Man Tricks says, did you guys watch Sean Ryan show today? No, I did not. Is it a good one today? Should I watch? No, Elon. Are you kidding me? Elon would never cut veterans' benefits. That'd be like the biggest political suicide thing you could ever do. No way. Come on, it's the best question you guys got. President Trump converted to Judaism. I know. I saw the President Trump converted to Judaism a couple of years ago, and he's inventing a vaccine AI. Musk wants to place Neuralink on people. Mark of the beast. We have to be careful. Donald Trump. All right, Juan. Like, everything was fucked 3 years ago. Like, there wasn't a single positive thing about the direction the country was heading in. Like, we couldn't speak online. We couldn't go into places without getting the shot. So as far as I'm concerned, Musk and Trump saved the world. Like, yeah, do they act a little Jewy sometimes? Yeah. But right now, like, they're breaking the deep state over their knee. So I think they're the most important people in the history of the United States, aside from George Washington, as of this moment. That's where I'm at. Denise says, Pentagon need to answer why a screw costs $45. I know, Denise, and it's yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I know. That's right, Condom Dog. Department of Education is under the executive branch. Oh, shut up, reserve currency. Ah, thank you, Denise. You are one of my favorites. You are an OG. You will always be an OG. Thank you. Thank you. That's what I'm saying. It was really good, but I'm torn because it conflicts with Dr. Greer. Regardless, we're on the tip of finding out a lot of secret information that's been held from taxpayers. What conflicts with Dr. Greer? No clue how everyone isn't jumping up and down over this being exposed. Yeah, I know. This should be a bipartisan thing. Like, everybody who pays taxes should be excited or should be pissed that this has been happening, but be excited that it's falling apart now. Like, Like the person who helps me get guests right now, I'm telling them every day, I'm like, find me liberals. I want to talk to liberals right now. Like, even I'm about to like even ask liberals in my family if they'll come on, and so I could like psychoanalyze them and be like, are you upset that this much money has been spent on things that like aren't even real programs? Like, who knows where the money's going? Like, does that bother you? Do you care? Like, it's kind of messed up, right? And just get inside the mind of people who aren't processing that. Protocols of the Elders Design is a fraudulent book written by a Russian agent. Interesting. All right, you guys are being a little this Skinwalker Ranch is a good show. You guys are being slow with the comments tonight, so I'm gonna pack it in early. I was ready to do marathon, but I guess you guys are tired. Liberal media popping up and dragging Biden over the last 4 years. Spilled it all. Sorry, just got work. Was watching all the shit today. I know, James. I agree. The Bisclock. All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow night. God bless. Love you. Until next time.
You know, we talk about the deep state. We talk about the globalists.
Inflation versus deflation. Well, I mean,
Here at Mar-a-Lago.
I'm baffled that this isn't front page news.
Do you guys support a specific political party, or do you dislike both of them?
Oh, it worked like a charm on you guys.
Let's go, Brandon.